serving this to a billionaire? That's brave or just stupid?
Or maybe it's taste room, the kind you'll never have.
The restaurant fell silent after her words. Everyone had seen it. A billionaire humiliated by the waitress he tried to mock. Michael Grant wasn't used to losing control, but that night, something in her calm stare unsettled him. Her name was Claire Morgan. To the world, she was just a waitress, polite, quiet, invisible. But behind those steady eyes hid a secret powerful enough to turn his arrogance into shame. What began as a simple dinner would soon become the night that changed both of their lives forever. The restaurant shimmered like liquid gold that night. Chandeliers cast warm reflections on glass and silver. The air carried the scent of roses, wine, and roasted lamb. Beneath all that beauty, something unspoken lingered. Quiet tension. Michael Grant sat at his table like he owned the room. In his world, maybe he did. A billionaire CEO used to winning, celebrating another deal that would make him even richer. He lifted his glass, studying the red liquid inside. The taste was soft, earthy, not expensive enough for him. Across from him stood the waitress, the same one who had dared to answer his sarcasm earlier with calm precision. She hadn't flinched, and that unsettled him more than he wanted to admit. He smiled slightly and said, "Do you always talk back to customers, or am I just special?" Her answer came without hesitation. "Only when they mistake arrogance for taste, sir." Her words were quiet but sharp enough to turn a few heads nearby. Michael leaned back in his chair, more intrigued than offended. She carried herself with a confidence that didn't fit her simple uniform. Her eyes didn't show fear. They showed balance, awareness, control. He studied her for a moment and said, "You're brave. But this is not bravery's world. This is mine." She replied softly, "Then maybe yours needs a little honesty." The way she said it made him pause. It wasn't defiance. It was truth, calm and clean. Somewhere behind them, a spoon hit the floor. The small sound broke the tension. Claire turned to help another table, her movements smooth and professional. Michael watched her go, curiosity growing like a slow flame. Moments later, the manager arrived, sweating slightly. "Mr. Grant, my apologies. The wine must have been—" Michael cut him off. "It's fine, your waitress already entertained me." The manager wasn't sure if it was praise or warning. He nodded and backed away. Michael turned his gaze toward the waitress again. She was smiling now, serving an older couple. The same bottle of wine poured easily from her hand, and the guests looked delighted. It made Michael wonder what they were tasting that he wasn't. He took another sip. The flavor hadn't changed, but somehow it felt different. Who was she? He'd met countless women, models, executives, heirs, but none had that calm energy. For the first time in a long time, he felt slightly off balance. When the evening ended, he asked for the bill. Claire brought it, graceful and composed. He handed her a generous tip and said, "You should use it to buy a better bottle of wine." She glanced at the money, then back at him. "I could," she said, "or I could save it for something real." Her words stayed with him even as she walked away. Michael left the restaurant smiling, but it wasn't the smile of a man in control. It was the smile of someone quietly confused. For the first time in years, someone had left him speechless. Inside the kitchen, Claire whispered to herself, almost like a secret prayer, "One day you'll remember this taste." The chandeliers flickered above, and the golden light faded slowly into black. If this story has already touched your heart, tell us in the comments from which city you're watching, and leave your like to keep following us. The night after their encounter, Michael couldn't sleep. He poured himself another glass of that same wine, the one he had mocked, just to taste it again. It still wasn't expensive, not rare, not the kind he would usually keep in his private cellar. Yet something about it stayed with him, not the flavor, but the moment. He remembered her eyes, calm, silent, defiant in the quietest way. He hated that he remembered. In his penthouse high above Manhattan, the city glowed beneath him like a sea of gold and regret. Michael had built his world from concrete and numbers, everything predictable, measurable, controllable. But tonight his thoughts were not about markets or money. They were about the woman who had made him feel small for the first time in years. He opened his laptop and searched for the restaurant's name. Maybe curiosity, maybe pride. He didn't know which drove him. He clicked through pictures of smiling waiters, expensive dishes and wine lists, but she wasn't in any of them. Then he called his assistant. Find out who that waitress was. The blonde one working at La Fontaine last night. Don't tell them why. The assistant hesitated. A waitress, sir? Yes, a waitress. By morning, a name appeared in his inbox. Claire Morgan. No record, no social media, no background. Almost like she didn't exist. Michael frowned. People always existed on paper, unless they didn't want to be found. Later that day, he returned to the restaurant under the excuse of a business lunch. He didn't usually visit the same place twice, but when he walked in, the hostess froze slightly. Billionaires didn't come back for food. She wasn't there. He waited, pretending to read emails, but the minutes stretched thin. When he finally asked for her, the manager's tone changed. Claire, she's not here today. She took a few days off. Off? Michael repeated, his brow furrowing. Yes, sir. Family matters, I believe. Michael nodded politely, but his mind started running. Family. That word always carried a story. He walked out, crossed the street, and stood by his car for a while, just watching the restaurant's reflection on the glass tower across the avenue. There was something about that name, Claire Morgan, that refused to fade. That evening, as the city lights blinked awake, he found himself driving north out of Manhattan, away from the noise. He didn't know why, only that his instincts pulled him somewhere quieter. He stopped at a small vineyard outside the city, a forgotten place hidden behind hills and fog. A hand-painted sign read, Morgan Estate, closed. His chest tightened. The gate was locked, vines dry and tangled. He stepped out of the car, the air colder here, carrying the faint smell of earth and grapes. In the distance, an old farmhouse stood under a grey sky, silent but alive with memory. Michael didn't go in. He didn't have to. He already knew, somehow, he had found her secret. Back in his car, he sat still, staring through the windshield. For the first time in a long time, he didn't feel like a man in control. He whispered to himself, almost laughing, "So, you were never just a waitress." Outside, the wind moved softly through the dead vines. And for a brief moment, the billionaire felt something he couldn't buy: humility. Morning broke over Manhattan like cold steel. Michael stared at the city from his office window, but his reflection felt like a stranger. Jaw set, eyes distracted, fingers drumming an impatient rhythm on the glass. Numbers scrolled across his screens, indexes, projections, profit lines, but the only word that mattered was the one painted on a weathered sign beyond the city: Morgan. He was a billionaire CEO known for turning riddles into revenue, but this wasn't a market puzzle. It was a face, a calm gaze that had cut through his performance like a blade slipped between buttons. He tried to shrug it off. He could have anyone at his table, sommelier, chef, a dozen advisors, and yet the only person he wanted to see was the waitress who had said so little and meant everything. He called the restaurant again. No Claire. Family matters, the manager repeated, softer this time, like the phrase itself carried dust and grief. By late afternoon, Michael's car slipped through crosstown traffic and stopped a block from La Fontaine. He didn't want to be recognized. He hated becoming someone else's story. In the alley behind the restaurant, where the smell of garlic and rainwater met the hum of compressor units, a door swung open. A woman in a black apron stepped out with a box of empty bottles. Not Claire. Another server. She paused, caught his silhouette, almost dropped the box, then forced a polite smile. "Do you know if Claire is all right?" Michael asked, voice low, careful. He didn't say the blonde one. He didn't need to. The server shifted her weight. "She'll be back when she's ready," she said. "She's dealing with the estate." "The estate?" he asked. The server realized she'd said too much and clamped down. "Sorry, I shouldn't. I need to get back." She fled inside. The door clicked. Silence gathered like mist. Michael's phone vibrated. A message from his assistant. Background thread turned up something. Morgan Estate, small historic vineyard north of the city. Founder passed 2 years ago. Financial trouble, probate entanglements. A daughter, Claire, kept a low profile. No press, no socials. Lived on site until last spring. Estate listed as closed. He already knew the gate. He had seen the paint flaking beneath his fingers. Night pulled its dark curtain again. He drove north a second time, not to trespass, but to witness. The vineyard lay asleep under the wintering sky, a hush over the sloped rows like a prayer stitched to earth. He parked by the locked gate and turned off the engine. The cold reached into the car with thin, honest hands. Headlights appeared in the lane ahead, a small truck. The engine cut, the door opened, and Claire stepped out. No apron, no bow tie, just a long wool coat and hair pulled back against the wind. She carried 2 bags and a bundle of papers held close to her chest. Michael opened his door and stood on the gravel. She didn't startle. She simply regarded him with that same steady quiet, as if she had always known he would be here. "You shouldn't be at work tonight," he said, immediately hearing how foolish that sounded. I called. They said, family matters." "Family is the matter," she said. No defensiveness, no warmth either, just truth like before. She walked toward the gate, set the bags down and took out a key. The chain moved, links scraping like old bones. "Claire," he said, testing the name in the open air. It felt right, like naming a star he could finally point to. "I saw the sign." She nodded toward the fields. "People drive past and think this is a ruin," she said quietly. "They don't see the roots." He took a step closer, but not too close. "I didn't know," he said, "about your father, about this place." "So you didn't have to," she replied, not unkindly. "You came for a show, a perfect glass, a perfect night. And you served me something imperfect," he said, realizing it too late sounded like an accusation. Her mouth quirked, almost a smile, but not. "No, I served you something honest." Wind pushed through the vines. The sound was like 1,000 small hands brushing denim. She lifted the bundle of papers so it wouldn't catch the breeze. Legal seals flashed. A corner of a letter showed the crest of a bank. "Are you in trouble?" he asked before he could stop himself. "I'm in a season," she said. "They pass." He swallowed. When he spoke next, his voice had lost the gloss of performance. "That bottle I mocked. Was it yours?" "It was ours," she said. "My father's blend. We called it Return. It was the first thing he taught me. A wine does not need a price to have a story." Michael looked past her at the rose that disappeared into dusk. "And the story now?" "Now it's a fight," she said simply. "A season of pruning." Silence fell again. Somewhere a barn door tapped, steady as a metronome. She pushed the gate wide, and the smell of winter soil rose like a bruise lifting to the surface. "Why did you come back here?" she asked, finally looking straight through whatever made him larger than life in other rooms. He could have lied. He could have said he was scouting investments, or that he was curious about land value, or that he didn't like loose ends. Instead, "Because I tasted something that stayed." She held his gaze for a long breath. Then she stepped aside, a small gesture of invitation. "Walk," she said. They moved along the central row. Their shoes found the same rhythm on the path, gravel giving underfoot. She talked quietly, not telling everything, just enough to let the night carry the rest. About a father who believed in balance, about harvests that were prayers, about a city that was too loud for grief. He listened, hands in his coat pockets, feeling for once the weight of listening. When they reached the farmhouse, a single porch light burned like a tired star. She stopped at the door and turned to him. "Tomorrow," she said, "I'm meeting someone from the bank. Do you have representation?" The businessman flickered back into being. She shook her head. "I have numbers, I have facts, I have time, maybe a little." "And if you run out?" he asked. She looked past him, into the fields. "Then I do what growers do. I cut back. I keep the root." The porch light hummed. He wanted to say 100 things, but none of them belonged to this air. He took a card from his wallet and offered it. She didn't take it. Not at first. She studied his face like he was a label she wasn't sure she could trust. "What are you offering?" she asked. "Not money," he said, surprising himself with how quickly the word came. "Not yet." A second taste. Her brow lifted. "Of what?" "Of your return," he said. "Pour it for me the way it was meant to be poured." She considered. Then she opened the door, stepped inside, and came back with a bottle without foil or fanfare, a cork darkened by time. She held it in both hands like a memory. "Fine," she said at last, "but not tonight." "When?" he asked. She looked up at the sky and measured the light like farmers do. "When the storm passes," she said. As if on cue, a first cold drop of rain broke on the step between them. The rain came heavy that night. Michael stayed awake in his apartment, the city echoing like a restless drum outside the glass. The storm hit harder than he expected, flashes of lightning flickering over the skyline, thunder rolling across the Hudson. He poured himself another drink, not wine this time, but whiskey, something with no memory. He didn't know what pulled at him more, her story or how she told it. Claire's calm voice had a gravity he couldn't measure. He'd spent his life surrounded by people who wanted something, power, approval, connection. She wanted nothing, and that made her unforgettable. By morning, the storm had passed. The world felt scrubbed clean, the air thin and bright. Michael cancelled his meetings and drove north again. He told himself it was business, some vague curiosity about the vineyard's potential. But deep down, he knew it wasn't. When he arrived, the sun sat low over the fields. The vines shimmered with drops of rain like glass pearls. Claire was outside in boots and a thick coat, inspecting the branches. Her hair glowed pale under the light. She didn't seem surprised to see him. "You said when the storm passes," he said. "I didn't think you'd take it literally." She smiled faintly, brushing mud from her gloves. "The vines don't rest, even after a storm. Why should I?" He followed her toward the small farmhouse. The smell of damp earth clung to the air. Inside, everything was simple. Wooden shelves, old photographs, a table with a few empty bottles lined like ghosts. Claire placed one bottle at the center. "This was my father's last harvest," she said. He called it return because he believed every ending deserved a taste of what came before. Michael ran his hand along the label. It was worn, the ink faded, but her family's name was still clear. Morgan Estate. She took out 2 glasses, hesitated for a second, then poured. The liquid was darker than he remembered, richer. He raised the glass, but she stopped him. "Not yet," she said softly. "You don't just drink this. You let it breathe." He set it down. "You sound like my sommelier." Maybe he learned from someone like my father. They stood in silence for a while. The air between them changed, heavier, more honest. When she finally nodded, he lifted the glass again and took a sip. The taste hit him differently this time. He felt the weight of soil, the bite of oak, the warmth of something older than pride. He closed his eyes. "It's incredible," he said quietly. "I mocked this." "You mocked what you didn't understand," she replied. "You weren't the first." He opened his eyes and saw her looking at the vineyard through the window. "Why are you still fighting for this place?" he asked. "Because it's the only thing left that's mine," she said. "Everything else was bought or taken." Michael nodded slowly. "What if it didn't have to be?" "What do you mean?" "I invest in people who know their worth. And you..." He paused, watching her reaction. "You remind me what worth really looks like." She turned toward him, skeptical. "How you think you can fix this with money?" "No," he said, "but maybe with faith." For a long moment she didn't speak. The silence carried the hum of the house and the whisper of wind through the vines. Finally she asked, "And what would you want in return?" He almost smiled. "A seat at the table when you win." Claire let out a quiet breath, half laugh, half disbelief. "You don't believe in losing, do you?" "Not until recently," he said. The words hung there, raw and honest. He wasn't talking about business anymore. Claire walked to the counter, filled his glass again and said, "Then you'd better get used to growing seasons. Nothing good comes fast." He took the glass. Their hands brushed for the first time. Brief, electric, unintended. She didn't pull away. Outside, the vineyard gleamed under the pale sun, reborn after the storm. Michael lifted the glass once more, this time not to taste but to listen. To the land, to her voice, to something in himself he thought he'd buried long ago. And as he watched her turn back to the window, he realized this wasn't about curiosity anymore. It was about redemption. The following week, Michael returned to the vineyard, not as a visitor, but as a man with a purpose. The winter sun stretched low over the hills, and the soil was dark with promise. He walked the path between the vines until he saw Claire near the barn, sleeves rolled up, a smudge of dust across her cheek. She looked stronger there, surrounded by the roots that carried her father's name. He hesitated before speaking. "You work like the world depends on it," he said. She turned, a faint smile in her eyes. "It does. My world, at least." Michael stepped closer, the crunch of gravel under his shoes breaking the stillness. "I've been thinking," he said. "About what you told me. About return." Claire raised an eyebrow. "Most people forget words like that after a night's sleep." He shook his head. "Not me. I don't forget things that matter." He reached into his coat and pulled out a folder. Inside, there were papers. Clean, precise, deliberate. Contracts, investment plans. "I want to help you," he said. "We can bring this place back. I can buy new barrels, new equipment, distribution. You could put your father's name on bottles again." She froze, looking at the folder as though it were a live thing. "And in exchange?" "A partnership," he said quickly. 50-50. You keep control of production. I handle everything else." Her eyes flicked toward the window. Outside, the vineyard lay silent under pale light, every branch cut back for winter. "I've seen men like you save things just to own them," she said. "I'm not here to own anything," he replied. "I'm here to make something worth saving." Claire didn't answer right away. She took a seat at the old wooden table and opened the folder. The first page glimmered with his company's logo, Grant Holdings. Beneath it, lines of legal language, stamped and notarized. Then her eyes caught a name, faint but familiar. She frowned, turning the page. Wait. Her finger traced the fine print. This clause, Morgan Estate Acquisition, 2016. Michael leaned over. "What about it?" "My father's vineyard," she said slowly. "Your company. You already owned part of it." He blinked, genuinely confused. "That's impossible. I would have known." She rose from her chair, voice sharper now. "You bought the bank that held his debt. When he died, they sold the land. You took it." Michael's throat tightened. The deal flashed in his memory. One of 1,000 acquisitions buried in numbers, handled by his legal team. A failed vineyard, a small estate, a name that meant nothing to him until now. "Claire, I didn't know." "You didn't have to," she said. "You just had to sign." The air between them turned cold. Papers rustled under her hands. She closed the folder slowly, pushing it back across the table. "I thought maybe you were different," she said. "Maybe what happened at that restaurant meant something. But this? It still can," he said quickly. "Let me make it right." "You can't buy right, Mr. Grant." The title stung. Mr. Grant. It sounded like distance, like walls being built again. She stepped past him toward the door, her boots striking the floor like final words. "Take your papers," she said. "You already own enough." He didn't stop her. The door opened, cold air flooding the room, carrying the smell of rain-soaked earth. When she was gone, Michael stood alone in the silence she left behind. The folder lay on the table, open to that single page. He ran his thumb over her father's name, Morgan Estate Acquisition. For the first time, the signature at the bottom didn't feel like power. It felt like guilt. He closed the folder and whispered, "What have I done?" Outside, the vineyard stretched under grey skies, a kingdom he had taken without ever knowing its queen. The following days blurred together for Michael. He sat in his glass office above the city, but for the first time, the skyline below felt small. The folder from Claire's table lay open on his desk. The logo of his own company stared back at him like a mirror he didn't want to face. He had signed the acquisition of Morgan Estate years ago, part of a larger chain of distressed properties absorbed during a regional collapse. Back then, it was just another line in a report, another box to check. Now every letter of that contract carried her father's ghost. He called his legal advisor, a thin man with an expensive tie and a voice trained to be calm. "I need full records on the Morgan Estate purchase," Michael said. "Yes, sir, but that file's ancient." "Then dig it up." Hours later, he held the documents in his hands. There it was, the signature of her father, Thomas Morgan, written in faded ink beside a clause marked, "Transfer of ownership upon default." His father's vineyard had been seized, not sold. The bank had called the debt while the man was in the hospital. Michael's stomach turned. He remembered reading a small obituary around that time. He hadn't connected it until now. The next morning, he drove north again. The road felt longer this time, as if the world itself wanted to punish him with distance. When he arrived, the vineyard was quiet. The sky had that pale, colorless light that comes before snow. Claire stood outside the barn, boxing up old records. She didn't look up when he approached. "You shouldn't be here," she said. "I know," he replied, "but I need to show you something." He handed her the folder. She hesitated before taking it, as though touching it might burn. "You already showed me enough," she said. "No," he said. "This part you haven't seen." She opened it, her hands shaking slightly. Inside was a check, not from his company but from his personal account. The amount wasn't small. "What is this supposed to be?" she asked. "It's restitution," he said, "for what I took." She looked at him sharply. "Restitution doesn't bring back a father." "No," he said quietly, "but maybe it can bring back what he built." Her eyes stayed cold. "You think I'll let you buy forgiveness?" "No," he said again, softer this time. "I'm not buying. I'm giving back what should have never been mine." For a moment, the only sound was the wind moving through the empty vines. Then she spoke, each word careful, like she was holding them with gloves. "Do you even know what that contract did?" He died thinking he failed. He believed his work, his land, his life meant nothing. You turned that signature into a death sentence. Michael's throat tightened. "I didn't know," he said. "I was blind." "You were busy," she corrected. "There's a difference." The silence stretched. He wanted to leave, to vanish from the shame pressing against his ribs, but he couldn't. He looked at her, the daughter of the man he had erased, without even knowing his name. "Claire, if I could change it, I would." "Then start by not pretending you can fix it," she said. "Some things can only grow again when you stop touching them." She turned back to her boxes. He stood there, helpless, with snow beginning to fall around him. The flakes melted against the papers in his hand, blurring the ink. He didn't move. After a long while, she said without looking up, "You want to help? Fine. Come back when the frost ends. If the vines survive, maybe we can talk." He nodded, though she couldn't see it. Then he left the check on the table and walked away, his footsteps crunching through snow, each one heavier than the last. Behind him, the vineyard disappeared under a veil of white, quiet, fragile, and waiting. Winter settled deep into the valley. The vineyard slept under frost, its rows buried in silence. The sky hung heavy and low, the air cold enough to sting the lungs. Michael returned weeks later, his coat dusted with snow, determination written in his steps. He hadn't spoken to Claire since that morning, since she had turned away and left him standing in his own guilt. But he couldn't let silence be the ending. The farmhouse door was slightly open. He hesitated before knocking. Inside, the sound of wood cracking in a fireplace broke the stillness. Claire was there, crouched near the hearth, feeding the flame. She looked up when she heard him, but her expression didn't change. "You came back," she said. "You told me to," he answered. "I told you to wait until the frost ended." "Then I'm early." He took off his gloves, the cold biting into his skin. "The vines will need trimming soon," he said. "I know," she replied. "I've done it my whole life." He nodded, stepped closer. The smell of smoke and pine filled the room. "You said some things that day," he began, "things I deserved to hear, but I can't leave it there." Claire set the poker down, wiped her hands on her jeans, and faced him. "What more is there to say, Michael? You took everything from my father, whether you meant to or not. It happened." "I didn't know," he said. "I didn't even remember the deal. It was just paperwork." "That's the problem," she said. "It's always paperwork until it becomes someone's life." He flinched. She wasn't angry in the way he expected. No shouting, no tears. Just quiet precision, the kind that cuts deeper. "Do you know what he said before he died?" she asked. "He said he was sorry for failing me, sorry for losing the land, and I told him it wasn't his fault, that the world was cruel. But I didn't know the face behind the cruelty would show up one day holding a check." Michael's breath caught. "Claire, you live in a world where guilt comes with a refund," she said. "But mine came with a funeral." He wanted to speak, to defend himself, but the words died before they left his mouth. He looked around the room, her father's photograph still hanging on the wall, the vineyard in summer, smiling workers, sunlight over full vines, the ghosts of what his signature had ended. "I can't undo what happened," he said finally, "but I can be here now, not as a buyer, not as a savior, just here." Claire stared at him for a long time. Then she said softly, "If you really want to help, put down your pen. Pick up a pruning knife." He blinked. "What? You want to see what you destroyed? Learn what it takes to make something grow again." Michael didn't hesitate. He followed her outside, into the biting wind. The vines stretched out before them, brittle and bare. Claire handed him a pair of pruning shears. "Every cut looks like loss," she said, "but it's how you make room for life." He took the shears and began clumsily trimming. The metal clicked through the stems, awkward and uneven. Claire worked beside him in silence, her movements precise, confident. Time blurred, 2 hours, maybe 3, until the sun dipped behind the hill. When they finally stopped, Michael's hands were red and trembling. He hadn't realized how much effort the simple act took. "You're bleeding," she said. "I've had worse. You're not built for this. Maybe that's why I need it," he said quietly. She looked at him for a long moment, then nodded once. "The frost will lift soon," she said. "If the roots survived, there's a chance for a new harvest." He wiped the sweat from his brow, exhaling into the cold air. "And if they didn't, then we plant again," she said. "That's what my father would do." They stood in silence, the field stretching endless before them. For the first time, Michael didn't feel like a billionaire. He felt human, small, humbled, and strangely alive. As they walked back toward the house, Claire said quietly, "Don't come here for forgiveness, Michael. Come here for work." "Maybe they're the same thing," he replied. She didn't answer. The snow began to fall again, soft as ash, covering their footprints behind them. Spring came late that year. When the first sun broke through the clouds and the snow began to melt, Michael returned to the vineyard without being asked. He didn't call ahead. He didn't bring contracts or suits, just old clothes, boots, and quiet hands that no longer feared dirt. Claire saw him from the window of the farmhouse, her expression unreadable. She didn't go out to greet him, but she didn't send him away either. He took that as permission enough. The vines were just waking up, thin shoots reaching for light, the soil soft with thaw. Michael walked the rows slowly, his breath visible in the cool air. Each stem he touched carried something fragile, something that wanted to live despite everything that had happened. He picked up the shears left from the winter and began trimming where she had stopped. His movements were steadier now, almost careful. The work was simple, but consuming. The sound of the shears, the click of metal on branch, was a rhythm that quieted his mind. Inside the house, Claire watched him from the window, her hands wrapped around a mug of coffee. For weeks, she'd told herself he wouldn't come back, that the guilt of a rich man had limits. But there he was, knee-deep in mud, sleeves rolled up, working like he belonged to the land. She didn't know what to do with that. By noon, Michael was covered in dirt and sweat. When he finally looked up, Claire was standing at the edge of the field. "You missed a few," she said, pointing toward a corner row. He smiled faintly. "I thought you weren't watching." "I wasn't. The vines told on you." She walked toward him, the sunlight catching her hair. There was a softness in her face now, not forgiveness, just quiet acknowledgement. "You work harder than I expected," she said. "I've had good teachers," he replied. "You mean me?" "I mean the roots," he said, smiling. She shook her head, but there was almost a laugh hidden there. For a moment they stood together, the breeze carrying the scent of damp soil and new growth. He looked toward the horizon. "How long until the next harvest?" "If the weather holds, 3 months, maybe 4. "And then?" "Then we'll know if it survived." He nodded, eyes on the field. "And if it didn't? Then it's not the end. Some vines take longer to trust the light again." Something about those words stayed with him. He turned to her, the sunlight behind her forming a pale halo. "You talk like this land is alive." "It is," she said. "It remembers who loves it." Michael glanced at his blistered hands. "Then I have a lot to apologize for." "Don't apologize," she said. Just keep showing up. And he did. Day after day he came back. No chauffeurs, no meetings, no assistants. He fixed fences, carried crates, and learned to listen to the rhythm of the wind. He discovered silence could be louder than words. Sometimes they worked side by side, saying little. Sometimes they shared coffee on the porch at sunset. Little by little, something unspoken began to mend between them. Not trust yet, but peace. One evening, as the sky burned orange behind the hills, Claire brought out a small notebook, weathered and stained. "My father's journal," she said. "He wrote everything about the vineyard here. Notes, seasons, mistakes. You should read it." Michael took it carefully, feeling the weight of the worn leather cover. "You're sure?" "He believed in redemption," she said. "Maybe you can understand what that means." He opened the first page. Inside, written in neat, faded ink, were the words, "Every root deserves another chance." He closed the book slowly, his throat tightening. For the first time, Michael understood what forgiveness looked like. Not words, not money, but a chance to grow again. As the last light of day faded over the vines, Claire said softly, "If this harvest succeeds, it'll be the first under my name." "It'll be ours," he said. She looked at him, searching his eyes. Then she said quietly, "We'll see." Summer arrived, and the vineyard came alive again. Rows of green stretched under the sun, heavy with fruit. The air smelled of grapes and hope. Michael worked beside Claire from dawn to dusk. They didn't talk much anymore. They didn't need to. The silence between them had changed. It was no longer heavy, just full. When the harvest came, they pressed the grapes together in the small barn, the same way her father had. Claire watched the juice flow, deep red and vibrant. "He used to say," she whispered, "that the color of a good wine comes from struggle." "Then this one will be perfect," Michael said, smiling faintly. They bottled it by hand. No labels, no investors, just glass and faith. When the first bottle was corked, Claire set it on the table and looked at him. "Return," she said softly. "That's still its name." The vineyard that had once died was alive again. Word spread quickly. A sommelier from New York visited, tasted, and couldn't believe the story behind it. Within weeks, the bottle that Michael once mocked became the most talked about wine in the city. When Claire was invited to showcase it at a high-end restaurant, she hesitated. Michael looked at her and said simply, "Let's go back one more time." The restaurant was the same, but everything else had changed. Claire walked through the doors not as a waitress, but as the owner of Morgan Estate Wines. The whispers followed her, not from mockery this time, but admiration. Michael sat at a table waiting. When she approached, he stood, silent for a moment. Then he said quietly, "You should do the honors." She poured the wine, the same one he had once laughed at, into his glass. Their eyes met, and the air between them felt still, reverent. "To what do we drink?" he asked. "To roots that survived," she said. He lifted the glass. "And to people brave enough to plant again." They drank. The taste lingered. Strong, clean, honest. Around them, cameras clicked, guests whispered, and the city outside glowed against the night. Claire turned toward him, her voice steady and soft. "You kept your word." "No," he said, smiling. "You kept yours." As the lights dimmed, the camera pulled back. Two silhouettes framed by candlelight, a vineyard reborn through forgiveness. Months later, the world finally knew her name, Claire Morgan, the woman who turned humiliation into grace and loss into legacy. Her wine, Return, became more than a drink. It was a story in every glass, a reminder that roots can grow again, even in broken soil. Michael stood at the edge of the vineyard during sunset, watching her sign a new shipment bound for New York. He no longer needed to speak. His silence said everything. Redemption doesn't come from money. It comes from showing up and staying. When Claire turned toward him, her smile carried the weight of every season they had survived. "We did it," she said. "No," he replied softly. "You did." The camera pulled back over the fields, the rose glowing gold in the last light. Somewhere in the distance, a single bell rang from the farmhouse porch, echoing like a quiet blessing over the land. Thank you for staying with us until the end of this heart-touching story. Tell us in the comments which part moved you the most. Subscribe and turn on the bell to receive more stories that inspire and transform. Leave a like if you believe in the invisible strength of dignity and family. And above all, thank you for being part of this community that believes in stories with soul. And before you go, watch the story I leave here on the left. I'm sure it will also move you and make you reflect.